Okay. All right. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that I am zooming in today from Whadjuk country, from the Noongar Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present. So I am going to present today on the I in free, prior and informed consent, and how using technology can help to visualise mining realities and get well-informed answers from the most important stakeholders, which is the traditional owner groups. So when we used to say informed, it was usually telling people what the plans are or what's been decided. Now that we're moving to consent-based approvals, this means informed is informed feedback and guidance. We need to inform people better of what our plans are and take on feedback so that we can co-design mining landscapes that are acceptable to local communities. When we talk about information, often people will say, well, how much do we share and how much do people want to know? We're moving towards where I'm working at the moment, sharing a lot of information. And often people do get uncomfortable with the amount of information, the amount of sensitive information being shared. But really, if we do want truly informed decisions to be made, then we need to share all of it. So as facilitators, intermediaries, and often advocates, it's up to you to work out what do people want to know and what do people need to know so that you can be sure that they're making decisions based on all the information needed. It's not only about sites, it's about now, it's about back then, and it's about the future. Layers of activity and taskscapes that represent what country used to be, what it's going to be in the near future, and what it'll be in the imagined Indigenous landscape of the future. This means sharing information about landscape, environment, and place. It's layering information that's important to the people that you're talking to, along with the information that needs to be shown in order to get feedback. Feedback and probably often guidance based on the subject matter expertise that traditional owners do bring to mine planning. So before, during, and after mining, it's important to be having open dialogue, transparent communications, and consultations to inform the whole life cycle of a mine. This means that we need to build virtual environments to visualise and amend, and also demonstrate in traditional owner informed iterations to mine plans and the future of the Indigenous estate through closure planning. But the question always is, how much can you show in one map? And static mapping is proving to be difficult and probably not the right vehicle for the volume of information and the restrictions on entering the field in the COVID world that we're living in now. So I think it's pushed a lot of people to use innovation and technology to better display information. So I might just share. Now, apologies if this comes through a little grainy. It's quite a big file to run. So please just let me know if there's any issues. I'll just get some confirmation that you can see a study area.
Yes.
Okay, so this is an example of a consultation tool that we work to build we send these out, they download onto the desktop of PBCs or individual traditional owners. And it is essentially what probably would have been a 57-slide PowerPoint pack that would have been often, I'm guessing a lot of people would experience it, provided 1 to 2 days before with little contextual information and some static maps. So I'll just start. So I should also acknowledge that this demonstration has been built without sensitive information. So any photos that look like they may be of heritage places, we've used heritage places that were deemed by traditional owners not to be significant areas. So if you can see the screen here, it seems quite busy. We have layered information that turns on and off. But when we do turn it on, what you'll see is a network of areas and activities that can be displayed in relation to each other, depending on what needs to be discussed. So this is where interactive modes of consultation tools do provide much more benefit than static maps, because people can interrogate it themselves. This doesn't have audio built in, but we are working towards, we often do narrate some information, and some people are actually asking now to have things narrated in language. So I'll just start with an example of how a heritage place might be represented in a consultation that can't be held on country. So if it's a sensitive site, it would start with a warning message to protect the cultural safety of both traditional owners and also other employees who might accidentally view things that are not meant for them. So in this screen, we'll often build in things like drone footage or flyovers using LiDAR and GIS. We'll provide a site description, an overview of previous research to date, images of the place, and then a return to map that in some consultations where consent or impact is being sought, it will actually ask really clearly 3 questions around consent, more research required, or remain protected. And this was born of frustration from traditional owner partners with a lack of clarity around what they're actually being asked. After working for decades in resources or with resource companies, I think that the patience for vague conversations is wearing quite thin, and people want to know what it is people are showing up to ask. So this is for a proposed pit design. So this is another example. And I will say that moving towards sharing information on blasting and landscape destruction has come with some difficulties and some disagreements. Some people do believe that it is confronting. I believe quite strongly that it should be confronting, that we need to really clearly demonstrate, and resource companies should be really clearly demonstrating what they're proposing to do and what the commitments that they make to controls and protections, that they can actually demonstrate how that works. So this might come through a little grainy because it's a video. So you'll see this is actually modelled off real blast controls. And this would be specific to the area, specific to the surroundings. And it's a way of demonstrating the controls put in place by blast experts. And it's a really good vehicle to be able to get feedback on whether or not the controls the buffers and exclusion zones are acceptable to traditional owners, or whether they need to be redesigned and then represented to the group. So previously, this sort of information would not be shown, A, because it can be sensitive and like commercially sensitive or to the business, and B, because it is uncomfortable to animate a blast in front of people who are making really difficult decisions about their cultural heritage and the lands which they have an obligation to take care of. This is an example of environmental information. So I think it's time to move away from discussing heritage and environment separately. Culture is written in the landscape, and it is in the environmental surroundings as much as it is in specific sites. So this is an example of where impacts from mining that might change water courses or change environmental values can be visualised so that people have an understanding of what it is they're being asked to give feedback on and what they might add by way of suggestions or really well-informed no's. A well-informed no's are just as valuable as informed yeses in resource development. And the earlier that this information is brought to traditional owners, the earlier people can plan to avoid areas or to have difficult discussions and ask to come up with co-design solutions. So last one I will show is a infrastructure. So this is an example of anybody who works in mining would recognise it as a primary crusher. So this has been modelled, so we could model this sort of information into an existing landscape where often we might not be able to get elderly people out to look at. Now, typically we would, or the mining company would explain generally what it will look like, where it would be, and then people would make a decision based on that. What we're doing now is using existing engineering information and models, which do exist and have to exist in order for these things to be built, and also is often modelled to demonstrate to the state what the mine plan is. We're using this sort of technology now to assist traditional owners to do initial visual impact assessments based on what things might look like in the landscape, if that's where they go, and then take feedback if it's not acceptable and demonstrate what other options might be. So apologies, this has just been set up. So this will give you vantage of a number of different areas. So people can interrogate. I think something that comes up quite often and people previously weren't aware of is that there is often a real importance to be able to see a place from another place. That the connection between places informs people of how they move through the landscape. And often it is a matter of taking that on board and going for redesigns on things like pits and waste dumps and things that interrupt the view in the landscape. And this is an example of how this sort of modelling can start to inform early discussions around things like progressive backfill and mine closure planning, which I think is becoming increasingly important earlier and earlier in these discussions. Like I said, as facilitators, and intermediaries, I think anthropologists are often going to be in meetings and assisting traditional owners to get the information that they need to make decisions, but also are going to be involved quite early on in discussions around what the post-mining landscape may look like. And often the imagined Indigenous estate post-mining is not what is possible due to lack of backfill material, all of these sorts of things. And I believe that people have been left to form ideas about what the landscape might look like. And it's really important now to start having real world conversations about what the landscape could look like and what traditional owners might want it to look like. So that's where these types of interactive consultation tools are really important. And also moving towards using LiDAR and detailed flyovers. We're moving towards a web-hosted interactive virtual reality environments, not just for consultations, but also eventually to be provided to people as really detailed records of country at different points in time, both then, now, and then eventually into the future. So that, I think I just had one more slide. So the future uses of interactive consultation methods. I personally think mine planning, obviously, landscape scale assessments, working towards visualizing social surroundings outputs in 3D, and also being able to visualize potential impacts up against those values will be really valuable. Participatory mine planning, so discussing mine plans, being able to demonstrate iterations in the mine plans. Traditional owner informed closure planning. Like I said before, I think that is going to be very strong in future conversations. Redesigned landscapes, capture and use of Indigenous scientific knowledge. How can we acknowledge that people have tens of thousands of years of understanding of biodiversity, landscapes, environmental patterns, and how we're going to use that to more thoughtfully carry out resource development. Digital twinning, which is web-hosted 3D virtual reality and augmented reality models, and return of materials to country. So planning eventually for some people who wish to do so to go and place items and materials back in situ. And yes, so I hope I didn't rush through that too fast. I do get a little nervous in some of my presentations, which Julie is quite aware of. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what I wanted to share. And I also would probably say from my experience working for a PBC, that when I pushed, and when traditional owners pushed to be given more information in formats that were understandable, that could be taken away and used in the community to consult more widely, resource companies will do that. So it is a matter of, as facilitators and intermediaries, really pushing for that. This information is generated for mine planning and to gain state approvals, environmental approvals. So I see no reason why this sort of information shouldn't be shared with the most important stakeholders.